Hello! For today's kitchen baking experiment, I'm going to be making apple pie. Now, the apple pie I'll be making will be based on two historical recipes. One is from 1575 from the Proper New Book of Cookery, and the other one is from 1591 from the Book of Cookery. Now, when you look at both recipes, well, they're pretty much the same. They call for apples, sugar, cinnamon, and ginger. The recipe I'll be using to make the pie crust is actually from the Good Housewife's Handmade from 1594, and that's because the recipe from 1591 just says to make a tart, but doesn't give any directions on how to make the tart. Now, before we get started, a little history on apples. Did you know that the Romans had introduced the apples to England? Before that, they had crab apples, but they didn't have apples as we would know them today. Then, in 1204, the English pearmain was first recorded. In 1296, custards were introduced, and those were actually sold up until the end of the 17th century. Right about that time, towards the end of the 17th century, was when the word costermonger actually became used, and that word means costermonger is a term used for someone who would sell fruits and vegetables in the street. Also, did you know that Henry VIII had ordered his chief fruiter, Richard Harris, to go to France and to study apples? Not only did he study the apples, he came back and helped create the first modern orchard in Kent. He also introduced pippins to England. Now, join me as I go to the kitchen and bake apple pie. Okay, so first I'm going to add in 1 1/4 cup of flour. This is to be making the pie crust. And now I'm going to melt 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Now I'm going to add in 3 tablespoons of water. And stir that in. And now I'm going to get 1 egg yolk. And now finally I'm going to add in the melted butter. Now time to stir everything together. Now if your paste ends up being a little too dry, you can add in another tablespoon of water. And as your dough becomes harder to stir with a spoon, then that means it's time to use your hand. Now next I'm going to take a little bit of flour and spread over my board. This helps the dough not to stick to the board. And then next I'm going to take my rolling pin and do the same thing. And now I've got my ball. Now it's time to roll it out. You want to try to flatten it out and keep it as circular as possible to go with your baking pan. Now, to help transfer the dough, I'm going to roll it along my rolling pin here. And as you can see, I should have put a little bit more flour on my board. That's okay. Most of it's coming up. And now from here, I'm going to unroll it onto my glass tray. Now that my pie crust is ready to go, I've got the oven preheated to 400 degrees, and I'm going to bake it for about 10 minutes to help dry out my dough. Now, while my pie crust is baking, I'm going to go ahead and start taking care of my apples. First, before I slice it, first I want to peel it. Now once your apple is peeled, it's time to slice it. Once it's sliced, then it's time. You can decide if you want to cut into small little pieces or just have little slices. For my pie, I like to have little slices. Now that I've got my first apple peeled, now it's time to peel my second one, and then just continue to peel all of your apples until you have about 5 apples peeled. Then after they're peeled, core them, slice them, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next part of the pie. Now that I have 5 apples peeled, cored, and sliced, I'm going to add in half a cup of sugar. And next, half a teaspoon of ginger. And half a teaspoon of cinnamon. Now I'm going to stir all of these together. And now that I've got my pie crust, I'm going to add in the apple slices, and I've got the oven preheating at 325 degrees, and then I will bake this pie for about 45 minutes. Okay, it's ready for the oven, and I believe I just said 325 degrees, but instead of 45 minutes, I'm going to bake for 1 hour. And now the apple pie is done baking. And it smells wonderful and I can't wait to cut into it. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. And subscribe to my channel.